Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation on optimising Australia's rail system. I'm Melinda Cilento, the CEO of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. I'll be facilitating today's discussion, and I'm really glad that you can join us. Can I begin by acknowledging that today, as we participate in this live stream, we do so on Aboriginal land. I'm in CEDA's head office in Melbourne, which is on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As we work our way through today's conversation, it's probably worth reflecting on how rail projects, such as the Inland Rail project, which traverses Australia's vast eastern landscape, can deliver benefits for everyone in the community, including for Aboriginal communities and people, by respecting traditional owners and through the process creating business and employment opportunities, that is connecting all in the community to the economic benefits of projects of this scale and scope. Let me, of course, also acknowledge and thank our sponsors today, CEDA Rail Track Corporation. Thank you obviously for bringing this conversation to our members, but also for your support for CEDA's work more broadly. While we've got a really good audience attending, it's always great to take the insights from our live streams to an even wider audience. So feel free to get on social media with your thoughts and highlights. If you're tweeting, please tag us at CEDA_news with the hashtag #OzRail. If you haven't done so, please also log into our Pigeonhole app to ask questions and respond to the poll question which we've put to the audience. Which I can just read for you now, actually. What would you consider the greatest benefit of an optimised rail system? And there's 4 choices in there. So get online and have a look at that poll question. Details are ceda.pigeonhole.at and the passcode for today is Rail Future. Now, there's no doubt that COVID has highlighted the importance of all things transport, logistics and supply chains. Rail has an important role to play in all of this. And joining us today in this conversation are the Honourable Michael McCormack, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, Mark Campbell, the CEO of Australian Rail Track Corporation, and Dean Dalla, the CEO of Pacific National and Chair of Freight on Rail Group. And Dean, I hope I've got that pronunciation right. Mark is going to kick off and then we'll hear from the Deputy Prime Minister and then we'll move on to a panel discussion. So if you haven't already done so, please get your questions in now. And I should have said at the outset, I apologise for our slightly late start, but the Deputy Prime Minister was unexpectedly delayed. So apologies for that and thank you so much for your patience. With that, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Mark, who is going to introduce the Deputy Prime Minister. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, Melinda. Thank you for extending the invitation. Deputy Prime Minister McCormack, Mr. Dalla Valle, and to all of those joining us, thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. 2020 has been a year like no other. For the rail industry, the impact of COVID-19 has served to highlight just how crucial Australia's supply chains are. And with that, how crucial our freight rail network is. The rail industry was vital during lockdowns to collectively ensure that Australia's supply chains remained strong and goods continued to move across the country to the cities and the regions. And we will be central to the recovery, supporting job-creating, economy-boosting infrastructure projects. Keeping people in jobs and creating new ones, particularly in the regions who are often hardest hit during difficult economic times, boosting local businesses and investing in nation-building infrastructure. I want to congratulate the rail industry for stepping up since March, working around the clock to help ease Australia's strained supply lines. And I especially want to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his leadership and work bringing industry together, as well as our customers for their collective approach to respond and reassure Australians in time of need. On the subject of optimising Australia's rail system for the future, I'd like to briefly highlight three key areas from my perspective. Firstly, infrastructure investment. Secondly, technology, and also reform. In terms of infrastructure, we at ARTC are building on behalf of the Commonwealth Government the Inland Rail project, connecting Melbourne and Brisbane via regional Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. This 1,700-kilometre fast freight network will better link producers to markets and create new opportunities for businesses and regional communities. From a technology perspective, we're excited to share more about our Advanced Train Management System, ATMS. ATMS is purpose-built for Australian conditions. It will improve safety, boost reliability and capacity in the network. Following successful trials and deployment between Port Augusta and Valle in South Australia, we have now started the next phase of deployment from Port Augusta to Kalgoorlie. In terms of reform, the National Freight and Supply Chain Strategy sets an agenda for coordinated and well-planned action over the next 20 years. The National Action Plan sits alongside the strategy and details key actions to be delivered over 5 years. From a rail freight perspective, we need to ensure that our voice remains heard and that we don't lose focus on delivering on some of the less attention-grabbing but equally important priorities. For example, around simplicity and consistent national regulation, so that we can continue to push and enable freight modal shift to rail. In conclusion, over the next decade, the role of the freight and transport industry will be critical to help drive national productivity and the economic growth of the nation. I look forward to the discussions today and really want to thank CEDA for hosting, who do an excellent job in helping drive the debate around securing a more prosperous future for Australia. There is an exciting future for Australia's rail sector, which I know the Deputy Prime Minister also shares. And with that, I would now like to introduce the Honourable Michael McCormack MP, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. I look forward to his address.
Thanks, Mark. So this is the moment when we get to say that the Deputy Prime Minister has been held up in cabinet meetings. We were expecting him to be here. So if you don't mind, gentlemen, I'm going to bring you straight into some questions that we're getting from the audience, and we're going to wing it a bit and hope that we get there in the end, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Those of you in the audience, you've got two experts here already, and I'm sure we'll soon be getting the Deputy Prime Minister in. So if you've got questions, we know there's a lot of you and we know you've got a keen interest. So please feel free to shoot your questions in. We'll have an interesting conversation and bring the Deputy Prime Minister in when he arrives. So the first question that we've got from James Bushell is that the East Coast Rail Network spans 4 states and is run by 8 main network operators. What is being done to eliminate differences and to centralise standard processes to make the total network cost cheaper? Maybe start with you, Mark.
Thanks, Melinda. Well, I mentioned earlier in terms of reform, the National Action Plan that sits alongside the strategy, the National Freight and Supply Chain Strategy, that has a number of key aspects to it, which starts to work towards eliminating that inconsistency. And for example, there are a number of actions in there around standardization and interoperability. And that really goes to the improvements that are required. I think the improvements at the moment are still probably a little bit piecemeal, and I think we'd like to see more progress faster. And I think to do that, we need a very collaborative approach between the infrastructure owners, above rail operators, and of course, the various governments. We're a long way from where we really need to be, and there's a lot of work needed to be done. I know, Dean, you've also got strong views on this as somebody who operates right across that that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me okay, Melinda?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Yeah, look, thanks for that question. It's quite sobering when someone actually puts the facts like that on the table. And look, Australia's it's burdened with a legacy of basically three gauges. Each state had its own regulations, its own rules and policies, and even signalling systems. So I think it's highly unlikely we're going to see total gauge conversion across. Certainly in Queensland, we're going to stay on narrow gauge air for a while, but I think for the rest of the country, we're more or less normalised around standard gauge. That's one great piece of infrastructure development that has occurred. I think the harmonisation of regulation is important. As it is today, we can have drivers in cross basically for Queensland, New South Wales, and the hours they can drive can change. How absurd is that? The person doesn't change, but the rules change. So I think the federalisation of ONSRA has been a good start. But I think we need to continue to push forward to have a truly national system. And then you're going to talk about the competitiveness of rail and making sure that it's actually an advantage to a continent nation such as we have, in that it really needs to be risk-based. It needs to be along the lines of the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, which looks at safety, and it looks at productivity. And I think that's certainly one of the areas of reform that FORG, the Freight and Rail Group, which all the major freight operators and the network operators actually partake in, are pushing forward to make sure we have simple, fact-based regulation, risk-based, right across the entire nation. And I think that will go a long way to simplifying things. One of the little examples I like to use is that you could have a truck driver trained up in Melbourne. We're talking weeks and months, not years, and they could basically hop on the largest truck that's available and drive to Broome the next day. I think we could have someone trained in Melbourne for a long time, and then basically if they got to Ballarat after a long time, that would be quite a feat. So that gives you an idea. And so I think having the right governance and regulation is important. Not that there's anything wrong with what we're doing at the moment. We never want to see safety watered down, but I think having one simple system of operating is critical. And then, as Mark said, the investment is absolutely critical. Inland rail, getting a north-south spine, getting a trip from Melbourne to Brisbane done in 24 hours is absolutely critical. It'll actually do away with basically you won't be going through many of the network operators you just said. You're basically one all the way through. And then Mark briefly touched on it there, is basically the technology, which is the advanced train management system, which certainly I'd like to talk more about this, and no doubt the Deputy Prime Minister will talk more about that. And if you have a look, the rail industry in so many ways has let itself be forgotten for decades. And I think it's now is the time if we're going to actually have a post-COVID investment. And we should invest in infrastructure, but also should invest in technology. And something like ATMS is great because you're developing a technology which is basically locally applied from world-leading technology. But what it's going to do is unlock the value of the network that's already there. So you're going to get more capacity, more productivity, and it's going to make it very, very safe. And so having that in conjunction with the investment, I think, is where you basically you do away with many of the issues that you've raised. So it's a long-winded answer, but I've got a lot to say on this matter. I live it every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just follow up on that a little bit. And there's another question about ATMS here, but I am interested. So, one of the things that I've heard in talking to business around the investments that government's making is that the governments are so keen to get the money out the door that they're perhaps sort of just wanting to use existing technologies or existing approaches. And, if anything, post-COVID, what we now really need to do is accelerate the take-up of technology and think about doing things differently. I'd be interested in your perspectives on that in the context of, post this great big pandemic. Does this change the priorities of particular projects? Are you still, what's the technology implication, and is it sort of being done with really the future forward sort of look, or are people just wanting to get money out the door at the moment? Dean, you're already moving, so I'm going to get you to go.
Yeah, no, let me jump in there. Mark is actually the owner of ATMS, but certainly I'm actually the user. And so, and then certainly discussions I've had, with many levels of government, is that ATMS is basically taking world-leading technology. If you have to ask yourself, how does a submarine know where it is underwater? It can't use GPS, it can't use any sort of milestone markers, can't have a trip meter on a submarine. So we're basically taking that technology, triangulating it with GPS and basically onboard tachometers, giving you very, very, very clear positioning for a train. And then if you have a look how trains are basically managed now, they're not far removed from candles and kerosene lamps, right? You basically just replace the candles and the kerosene lamps with incandescent globes, then we went to LEDs. That's as far as we moved, but we just basically have signals. In some parts of the country, we don't have any signals. And so what ATMS does is basically knows exactly where the train is. It allows a central organising algorithm to know exactly where everyone is in the network, and then basically to optimize the train and all the traffics for the basic load, the contours, the direction, and the velocities. And by doing that, you're not basically pulling up at arbitrary points. You're actually continuing basically some trains, you're pulling others over at the right point. And more importantly, it doesn't let anyone overspeed, or it doesn't let anyone exceed their orders. Now, this is actually, it's not the right word to say, but for technology, it's actually shovel ready, because as Mark said, this has been in development for a decade. We have been piloting this with ARTC, and it's now running every day between Whyalla and Port Augusta. While that's only 60 or 70 kilometres, if you can run there, you can run a continent. And so now it's about injecting the right funds into that and getting it rolled out faster. It's always going to be part of inland rail. So the inland rail is never going to be built with signals. It's always going to be built with this in mind. But actually investing in it now is critical. So it's going to give smart jobs. It's going to actually allow us to optimise and get more productivity and more capacity out of our existing network without spending another dollar on sleepers or on rail. And if we do it right, it's going to create a centre of excellence for manufacturing here in Australia. And then, this is something which is exportable, because every continent, probably outside of maybe North America, who only have their own system, will want something like this. And I think if we do it right, we could export this technology. I know, Mark, you could probably add a lot more of the detail around this for me, but certainly you can see it as a user. We are just waiting to basically get this up and running.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dean. I wouldn't add much more other than to say we've had strong support for ATMS from the government, from the Commonwealth government, and I think there's a well understood need to make sure that the systems that we are deploying across Australia are interoperable, and we don't have any glitches where a train passing through territories can't do that smoothly. I think Dean just touched on a point there as well, which is probably a little bit more heightened after COVID, which is Australian manufacturing. And I think one of the things we're pushing towards with our partners Lockheed Martin is in the development of ATMS is local manufacturing. Initially, some of the initial equipment will need to come from the US, but it's in everybody's best interest to develop an Australian manufacturing capability of that, as Dean mentioned. So, look, a lot of strong support for both the technology, for the improvements that it brings, and also for the opportunity to enhance local manufacturing.
And Melinda, I might just add a little bit more. I mean, why are we talking about this? Everyone's probably listening, thinking you can buy train control technology is readily available, and it is. But if you're operating in a very dense network, such as Sydney trains, for instance, we're actually running many trains over a smaller area. It justifies investment in a lot of trackside hardware. So you can basically have readers on the train, you can have trackside hardware. Everyone knows where everyone is at any point in time. When you're running trains across the length of the continent, the maintenance cost of having trackside hardware, even the signals we have now, become high maintenance items and form a large part of Mark's cost base. So ATMS doesn't need trackside hardware. It relies on the onboard technology to tell the network where the train is with great accuracy. And that's the secret about ATMS. And I think that's where, to many other developing countries around the world, you're going to be able to actually sell this to if you get this right. And we prove it here, which we're well on the path to doing. So that is a subtle difference.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dean. Mark, I might just, we talked a little bit about, the manufacturing opportunities here, and I mean, it sort of leads to the question around procurement. And I think I'm right in saying that there were some changes around some of the procurement policies and processes to try to bring in small and medium-sized enterprises, kind of spread that economic contribution, if you like. But also, I know there's been a focus on making sure, in my opening comments, I spoke to creating opportunities for Aboriginal communities, and I know that's been a focus as well. Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. No, that's right. I think the original, well, obviously I've sort of only been around in ARTC for about 7 months now. But if you go back several years, the original concept of constructing inland rail was in 13 discrete packages. And they ranged with different sizes, but many of them were very large. So that was reviewed over the last 12 months or so with a few things in mind. One was to see whether there was any opportunity to speed up delivery. The second area was what you mentioned, which was to be able to offer varying size packages, smaller packages, and therefore to increase the pool of companies that could be involved in inland rail, rather than just be dealing with a few very large companies. So the team in Inland Rail have been working very hard over the last 6 months or so to develop that strategy, and are now in the process of rolling it out. And as you say, that includes all sorts of opportunities for smaller Indigenous companies to partner with varying sizes of construction companies to give the whole project a much broader reach into the community and into the workforce. And so the Inland Rail team are really, really excited about that opportunity.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Mark. I think we're now fortunate enough to have the Deputy Prime Minister joining us. Deputy Prime Minister, unfortunately, you missed the glowing introduction that Mark gave you. So
story of my life.
You're just going to have to take it from me that he was singing your praises. But we don't want to hold you up. Obviously, our audience is pretty keen to hear from you. So perhaps I can just hand over to you for some comments, and then we'll continue on with the Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Melinda. And look, I'm really apologetic. We had a cabinet type meeting which went for way over the odds, but that is the story of this year with COVID, and I appreciate everybody's used to these Zoom meetings, everybody's used to some sort of disruption in their lives in one way, shape or form, and the fact that we've had so many of these meetings, it is a good thing in one sense, because we're trying to organise and arrange the logistics of the nation, but in another sense that I do apologise for my lateness. And I know Mark Campbell, that is the CEO of the ARTC, is on the line as well. So thank you for introducing me a little earlier. And it is a great pleasure to be discussing Australia's rail system for the future. And I know, and you know, that 2020 has been a year like none we've ever experienced. It began with, well, my party, I suppose, marking our first century as a party. And I know Qantas did as well. There's quite a few organisations that have marked 100 years this year. But, we look back over 100 years, those students of history know that the Spanish flu outbreak was taking its toll in Australia back in 1920, and now history has repeated itself. But we've got a plan for the future, and we can't just leave it to chance, and that's exactly what our government has been doing, setting out a comprehensive economic recovery plan for Australia. I appreciate that we were so close to a surplus, and yet now we're going to be paying the debt back for some time to come. But there's reasons why we've done what we've done, and I know that JobKeeper has enabled us to keep those workers, whether they're in transport or whatever the case might be, connected with their employers, and that was so important to keep the wheels of business, the wheels of the economy turning, whilst at the same time cushioning from the effects of what has been a global health pandemic. By now, you may be used to hearing about inland rail events such as these. There are many ways in which inland rail supports jobs, and I was delighted that just recently we opened, put in that first, or I should say the last spike of that the Narromine to Park section, only about 100 kilometres, but for that section, $110 million went to 99 local businesses, and there were hundreds of people working in, including many Indigenous people. And that was a really good thing. And most of them were locals. And the Narrabri North Star section, the second of 13 sections, will be just the same as far as, in one sense, size and scope. And I know we're going through the process in Queensland with EIS and certainly collaborating with the Victorian government about what we need to do there in the future. But a project of this size, I suppose it springs to mind, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I know that sounds so corny, but can't almost even believe I'm saying it. But the ARTC is chewing very hard. Mark there working hard at the helm with Richard Wankmuller, with Warren Truss as the CEO and the chair, respectively, of the Inland Rail project. As I said, it's being constructed in 13 sections. The first of these was finished in September, and it brought into play Parks. Now, Parks is at an interesting situation because it sits at the crossroads where the east-west transcontinental rail connects with the north-south inland rail, the emerging process there. And the state government is, of course, coming on board with a special activation precinct. And I know there's a bit of interest around these intermodals, connecting road and rail. The state government, the New South Wales government, that is doing their part along the route. They've also done one at Wagga Wagga. Elsewhere, these SAPs, they're called Special Activation Precincts. They're going to play a significant role in what we're doing as a Commonwealth government. And I know that certainly they're pretty excited at Moree. We had 5 mayors on board for the first sort of construction of the second section, as I said, Narrabri to North Star. So work on that is already happening. More than 500 construction jobs being supported on that section. What a stimulus that is to the northwest sector of the state. So hard hit in recent times by drought. But Mark Colton was telling me, he's the member for Parks. Parks electorate doesn't actually include Parks. Don't ask me why, it just doesn't, never has. But anyway, that farmer was telling Mark that he has produced this year 100,000 tonnes of wheat. Now, this year has been like no other with the amount of grain, the amount of what we've achieved through the harvest. And we need, of course, the very best in freight logistics to be able to cut that tonnage in the future. And let's hope that the weather holds up and we'll get that sort of tonnage. And I'm sure we will, with better breeds and better equipment, better farming methods. We will do just that. So the Inland Rail is going to play an important part. The Inland Rail, of course, and our economic recovery plan for that matter, sees us investing heavily in rail right across the country. But certainly with urban passenger rail, we're doing it in partnership with the states. In early June, we announced a further injection of $1.75 billion into the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport Rail Project. Now, this ensures that approximately $11 billion project will start this year, providing a significant boost during the COVID-19 recovery. New 23-kilometre metro rail will become the transport spine for Western Sydney by connecting from St Mary's to the Western Sydney Aerotropolis via the Western Sydney International Nancy Bird Walton Airport. Bit of a mouthful. I don't know whether anybody has actually driven past or maybe seen the drone footage of that Nancy Bird Walton International Airport at Sydney, Western Sydney. It is quite phenomenal. I'd suggest you go and have a look. We're contributing $5.25 billion to this. 5.8 kilometres of extra tunnelling has been designed for the new line, with 6 stations proposed for stage 1. Now, last month, expressions of interest for the surface and civil alignment works package were released, and in addition to the station boxes and tunnelling works EOIs, which were released in September. So there's a bit happening there. Early construction work is scheduled for later, or very soon, I should say. This will help to meet our objective of having rail connected to Western Sydney International Airport in time for its opening. We're also investing heavily in urban rail in WA. The Australian government has committed $2.3 billion for network shaping MetroNet projects. This involves 70 kilometres of new heavy passenger rail and 14 or thereabouts new railway stations, so that's pretty exciting. And it also includes the jointly funded Morley-Ellenbrook line project. That's 625 million. So they're big, big numbers. What they also mean is better connectivity in the future, but construction jobs, but also ongoing both direct and indirect jobs in the future. And I know that Perth's existing rail signalling and control system, some would argue, need to be replaced. Well, we're doing that with $102 million. They're near their end of their asset lives. Some would argue past their use-by date. We're getting on and we're doing just that. We're doing that with the McGowan government. Now more than ever, it is important to ensure we've got the safe and efficient transport connections. And I've got to say that that what we've done this year to get that freight and logistics, whether it's rail or whether it's road or indeed aviation, that national freight code, and we got that through within hours, not days. Whereas other sectors sort of lagged behind, we were way out in front. Had to be because we needed those supermarket shelves stocked, but also the getting around personal protection equipment, face masks, respiratory devices around the nation was really important. And I have to say, I was able to work really well with ministers of transport and logistics and infrastructure ministers of all political persuasions, and we just put the politics aside, just got on with the job of doing what needed to be done. I'm sure the public actually appreciated that. Through the National Cabinet process, they've seen this new level of interaction between Commonwealth and state. And we're not always on the same political persuasions, of course, but we've just got on and done things. Now, the Melbourne Airport Rail Link, speaking of projects along this sort of line, along this sort of measure with governments of different political persuasions working together. I know back in, I'm going to say it was mid-2018, Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister. We announced this project, an important project. We put $5 billion towards it. It is going to provide access between the airport and the Melbourne CBD in less than 30 minutes. They've talked about this for years. We're getting on and we're finally doing it. And this will include a number of options to get a train to the airport for the first time, including through the Super Hub station at Sunshine, a little bit west of Melbourne. As I say, we've had our $5 billion matched by the Victorian government. I won't list all of the rail projects we're investing in, but in passing, I do want to note a further $208 million in stage 2 of the Warrnambool rail line upgrade. That is one of the fastest growing areas, not just in Victoria, but indeed, out that way of the nation. And we want to make sure that, we've got the right infrastructure in the right place, literally right now to do just that. We're working towards it. Stage 3 of the Shepparton upgrade in this year's budget, also an important piece of infrastructure. We've committed $7.5 million towards a study to investigate improved access into Melbourne for passenger trains from northern Victoria. So there's a bit happening in Victoria as well. Now, faster rail, of course, offers a significant opportunity to shift the focus of population away from sprawling major capital cities. When I say sprawling, a lot of these capital cities, congestion is an issue. And if one thing COVID has taught us is that you can work in the regions, get on one of these Zoom conferences, and but for the fact that Mark probably told you I'm in Canberra, I could well be in Wagga Wagga, or I'm on my way to Valle this afternoon. I've got to catch a plane very soon to West Wyalong and then hop, skip and jump it over to Valle. Now, Valle's only got a population of a few hundred, but I could well have done this from Valle. Regional Australia has really come into focus because ag has held up. In fact, it's increased. Mining and resources have increased despite the drought, despite COVID and everything else that's beset them. But we are now, on the cusp of actually having our regions really taking off. So we've got to have the right infrastructure in place. Now, I'm pleased to say the Victorian government has matched our commitment towards faster rail. Stage 1 works will see the line between Werribee and Newport upgraded, slashing times by 15 minutes and providing a 50-minute express service to Geelong, that's significant. And no matter what we've done, and I appreciate it's not rail, but it's certainly. I got using North Connects. I got out of Sydney the other day in 20 minutes. I mean, heart of Sydney, out onto the 110 highway, unbelievable. And that's what we're doing. And we haven't just stopped at the Geelong corridor. We've done other things as well. We've made sure that in this year's budget, we've committed an additional $15 million to accelerate faster rail planning from Sydney to Newcastle, $4 million from faster rail from Perth to Bunbury. And it brings, everything that we've done, excuse me a minute, across Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and WA, which I mentioned, is $79 million. Our economic recovery plan for Australia is right across the nation, $110 billion over 10 years. Now, that includes a significant support for rail, and that's going to have a vital role in our recovery. I want you all to know, I know that Mark is committed, the ARTC is committed, Richard and Warren, who I mentioned before, and I know each and every one of you on this line, and I appreciate there are many, are absolutely committed to making sure that rail has a big future in the way we look at infrastructure, we look at transport, we look at better connecting our nation. Additional funding will see construction work on the Sydney Metro, Western Sydney Airport Rail, as I said before, commence soon. We're getting on with those, Melbourne to Geelong corridor. Rail's in the DNA of the party that I lead, and its enthusiasm is shared, I have to say, very much by our coalition partner, Scott Morrison. Wanted me to tell you that. I've just finished 10 minutes before I joined this meeting. I told him where I was going, and he said, well, make sure you let them know that our government is absolutely committed to rail, and we'll certainly look forward to discussing what options and the sort of funding that we need in the future. So I might leave it there, and happy to take any questions after I have a sip of my cup of tea. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Minister. Have a sip of your cup of tea. We're hoping that we might be able to hold on to you just for a little bit longer and keep things going till sort of 5 or 10 past 2. Yep. If you need to get out and about, just let us know, and we'll thank you for your time at that point. We're going to kick off. We've actually got a video question from Mal McDowell, who is the CEO of Optimising Australia. So we might just go first to that question, and then we've got some questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Mal McDowell, CEO of Arcadis Australia Pacific. With so many competing entities in the logistics market before the disruption of COVID, how do we ensure that the solutions of today in intermodal developments linking road and rail networks are resilient to withstand the test of future challenges?
Well, that's why we put in place, Mel, and thanks for the question. It's good, and it's got, I suppose, the answers in a few parts. I mean, that's why we put in place special funding for logistics and the freight supply chain. And that was back in 2018 when I became the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. But more than that, I think it's probably more of the collaboration I talked about with our state partners and even down to the point of private players, but also local governments. They all have a shared part to play in this. I can't emphasise enough how important it's been to get things done through, the Rita Safiotis from WA and the Eva Lawlers from the Northern Territory and Mark Bailey from Queensland and Jacinta Allen from Victoria. And I've just named 4 state and territory Labor ministers. Of course, you expect, you do expect the Commonwealth to get on with its state partners, but that has been there's been a shared vision this year. And I've got to say, we all now, given the fact that Queensland has had their election, so they're in there for another 4 years. I rang Anastasia Palaszczuk the day after the election, and we agreed that we just needed to get stuff done. Inland rail, of course, yes, through Queensland, and put the politics aside. So that supply freight task and that the funding that we put towards that in 2018, we're getting on with that. The logistics are important, but I think a new sense of collaboration between parties at all levels. But when I say parties, I mean, sphere of government at all levels, but also using that, those private players who can come in and partner us in the journey as well.
Thanks for that. One of the things that Mark and Dean and I were sort of having a bit of a conversation with before you joined us, Minister, was around the role of technology, and it's a theme that's come through a number of the questions. The audience interested to understand the potential impact of the advanced train management system, and variously sort of asking questions about what the barriers to the adoption of technology have been, but maybe we flip that and talk about, what more can be done to enable the use of technology to really enhance the efficiency of our train system.
Yeah, well, I guess, we all have to, nobody really likes change, only perhaps babies with dirty nappies. But, I know we have to adapt to change, and change in transport is change for the better. But it comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost to both upgrading and updating our thinking, what we've been used to. And so I suppose for those who've been decades in the industry, the change is actually happening, not on an exponential base, but it's just hitting us all at once. That we do have the Office of Future Transport Technologies, which is looking across the broad range of all things transport and where we go and what we do. They're doing a lot of work on road, I appreciate at the moment, but the ability to take on board those changes that are happening abroad with new technology is going to be pretty critically important, not only for passenger rail, not only for freight rail, but also for passenger signalling, doing all the rest. And that's why, as I mentioned before, and it's what we're doing in WA, updating their signalling. I was really excited that at the Narromine to Park section of Inland Rail, there at Peak Hill, where they've got that, they've got most of the technology stored there for that first section. It's all Australian technology, but it's Australian technology adapted from the world's best practice and the world's best technology. But, and it was fully installed, fully invented in Brisbane, I believe. But, there's some exciting things happening too here. And given the fact that I'll also just give this quick plug and I'll take the next question, we're looking at, we've put $1.3 billion towards it. Some might argue, well, that's just the start. That's just a seed funding, I'll call it, to our manufacturing strategy, because there's the ways and means of actually adopting technology into manufacturing, into rail, to build a better future for faster trains, for better signalling, for everything that technology can bring to improve rail. And it's not only happening abroad, and we need to take on board those lessons and that technology, but it's happening right here in Australia. So that's pretty exciting.
Thank you for that. I've got a question that I think I'll direct to you first, Minister, but then I think pull in the other panellists because they'll have perspectives on this. Someone in the audience really keen to understand perspectives on the top 3 initiatives that would improve the rail freight network in Australia right now.
Getting on with Inland Rail is the first one. Making sure that we do adapt to technology. And Inland Rail, of course, is going to be a 5-year build. And whilst I appreciate it's a line, it's not a train. But we do need to, if technology, whilst you could argue that the line is the line, it's not going to take on as such all that new technology that wasn't sort of there when they first started talking about it back in the 1890s. But certainly the rolling out of Inland Rail, the adaptation of and adoption of new technologies, and making sure we invest, and this is a part we all should play in, probably our most important capital investment, and that is human capital rather than infrastructure and capital equipment. Human capital is going to be so important, and I know that with the likes of Carolyn Wilkie coming on board and others coming from other sectors of transport industry into what we do and how we do it, I think that's going to be an important part as well.
Thanks, Dean. Did you want to throw your 3 initiatives in the mix?
Yeah, I'd probably put those three in and add one, but let me just go back over what the Deputy Prime Minister said, and I completely concur with his view. I think investment is absolutely critical, and it's critical from a number of points of view, but it's a very powerful signalling tool. So when you get policy right, you get investment right, that's when the private sector comes in and invests in the back of it. And have a look at how we opened up a terminal in Parks last year, brand new. It'll be basically the largest rail terminal in the country when complete. And the Deputy PM came along and opened it up with us. And that only happened because Inland Rail is being sanctioned, it's proceeding, it's going ahead, and that gives the private sector confidence to go and we put $35 million into that terminal. We're looking at a terminal in Toowoomba with the Wagners, because that'll be a staging point on the Inland Rail. We're talking to the federal government and the state government of Victoria about where Inland Rail is likely to complete, and we're ready to make investments there. So I think you have to give the sector confidence and give it basically line of sight where it's going, and basically the investment will follow. And that's what you want to see. This can't all be about handouts from government. And also, when we have certainty of development, such as the new Aerotropolis out Western Sydney, where we're actually starting construction on the St Mary's intermodal terminal tomorrow, and that'll be open with the New South Wales Minister Stuart Ayres. I just started construction there, and that'll be up to $100 million of investment there. So I think investment certainty is critical for the private sector to quickly follow. Technology is absolutely key, and Inland Rail will have ATMS. And I think I've spoken a lot about ATMS this morning. I think the industry has been slow to take up technology. There's a whole range of reasons for that. The average age of a train is probably 10 times that of a truck. And so you get basically 10 times the generational turnover in technology. But I think we see the uptake of technology, some is inhibited by how we're actually governed. And again, I'd say ensuring that the rail sector is governed for safety and productivity, and not just basically ensuring prescriptive legislation is enforced, I think is absolutely critical. And the last part I'd say for the rail industry is ensuring that there is equivalency of costing. And so basically the rail sector is charged and made to pay its way on an equivalent basis with the road sector. And I think that's exactly what the country needs. And then freight will flow to its most pragmatic and economic corner. I think that's all we're asking for. So I'd put a fourth one in there.
Thanks, Dean. Mark, anything you want to throw in the mix as well?
Well, just briefly, I think I touched on my introduction, infrastructure investment, which the Deputy Prime Minister's covered. Technology, ATMS, we've spoken about. Dean spoke quite a lot about that. I see that as critical for the future. And the last one, reform, standardization of the arrangements right across the network instead of this fragmented approach. I note, just recently at the Infrastructure and Transport Ministers meeting on the 20th of November, I think it was, Deputy Prime Minister,
I'll take your word for that, Mark. Yep. How many meetings lately? I can't remember the exact dates, but but I know the next stage that the ministers agreed to work on was in and around developing common standards, developing common operating rules, and something that Deputy Prime Minister touched on was targeting careers and career pathways in the rail industry, and having a more consistent national approach to that. So. Yep. No, that's all I'd add. Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, I was going to verbal the Deputy Prime Minister a little bit because he talked about National Cabinet and, getting on with things and this working across, and I was going to sort of draw the threads through some of your comments earlier around this great need for harmonisation, which, of course, we've talked about in so many sectors, to be honest, for so long. So here's hoping that in the spirit that we've seen the response to COVID, we can get there now on some of these other issues which seem to have been lingering but will be so important in enhancing productivity. Deputy Prime Minister, I'm going to lump together. There's a theme coming through a few questions that have from the audience, and it's basically sort of acknowledging the importance of freight. acknowledging your comments about some of the urban infrastructure projects that you've got going. But actually what people are really gravitating to in their questions is what scope for passenger movement, both between the capital cities and between capital cities, the urban capital cities and regional cities around Australia. And there is a repeated reference to fast train, bullet train, those sorts of things.
Yeah, look, I mean, I won't deny it. I you know, like anybody, everybody's probably a proponent of a bullet rail, fast, very fast train, call it what you like. I've actually had a look at some of the technology, places such as Hong Kong and elsewhere. And those on the forum who've ridden on one know, getting from point A to point Z is pretty quick. Back in 2010, when I first got into Parliament, I actually did a forum in Wagga Wagga and was blown away by the number of the Australasian Railways Association helped host that. And I was blown away by the enthusiasm. That said, it was probably about $110, $114 billion then. I would hate to think how much it is now because the cost has gone up considerably. I honestly, we're looking at putting more of our infrastructure investment eggs in other baskets at the moment. Of course, if we had such a bullet train, where do you do it down the east coast? Do you do it inland? I mean, naturally, I'm going to say the inland because I believe in regional Australia. The only one way of actually boosting those regional capitals, such as Wagga Wagga, my hometown, Albury, Wodonga, would be to have a very fast train between Melbourne via Canberra Sydney, down through Canberra, down to Melbourne, via Wagga Wagga and Wodonga, etc. But of course, you can't have too many stops because it defeats the whole purpose of it. So, and I know there have been places along the corridor which have been reserved and through the various state planning agencies and indeed the Commonwealth to make sure that at some future point in time when there is the money to go down that path. We've spent an extraordinary amount of money this year on such things as JobKeeper and making sure that we had planes as best they could in the air and continuing the investment in Western Sydney Airport and Inland Rail and those things. It's Inland Rail, it is costing us more than what we originally thought because it's just the sheer road segregations and separations and, initially, it was a cost that we didn't have a lot of the planning and that done when the cost was marked down originally. So there's been a big call on government investment this year. And so what we need to do now is make sure that we roll out what we said we were going to do and perhaps look at it at some point in the future. I mean, I appreciate that everybody on the line just says, well, money's never been cheaper. Why don't you just borrow and go from there? But we are in an extraordinarily difficult geopolitical situation at the moment. So, we need to work through those issues too. Trade is critically important to us. We're a trading nation. So we just have to, given the fact that we've still got a global health pandemic, which we're not out of by any stretch of the imagination. Let's hope the vaccine works and let's get the economy back on an even keel before we go investing in something that is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Not necessarily just the sort of investment that we're making in Marl and Western Sydney Airport and Inland Rail, those, $5 to $15 billion investments. Let's get those sorts of things right, and then we can look at it later on down the track.
Have I got time to ask you one more question? One
quick one, because I really have a plane to catch.
Look, the question was from Ingrid, and it really is about skills, and it's how can we get people into the profession and get the skills built up and build careers. So
we're investing heavily in skills at the moment. I'm really pleased that question was asked, and not just males too, but also getting women involved and engaged because I think that's going to be of critical importance. So Michaelia Cash at the moment, along with the industry minister, has got some good skills packages out there as far as coercing like-minded private entities that want to invest in people. There's a 50% apprentice subsidy. We've got a lot of things to get young people skilled up. We're working with TAFEs. We're investing like never before in those sorts of things. There's plenty of jobs happening in transport right across the board, but particularly in rail. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'll work with people such as Dean, and I gave her a bit of a plug before, Caroline. There's a bit happening in this space, and so if anybody's got any ideas, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm so pleased that you could make the time available.
Sorry I was late.
Of course. Oh, absolutely understood. I'll let you rush off and catch your plane.
Have a great Christmas, everybody, and just remember, stay positive and test negative.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Dean and Mark, I thought I'd just give you a couple of minutes to see if you had anything that you wanted to throw into that question on, the skills need, very small market here and quite specialised, but whether you had any thoughts that on that issue. Dean, maybe to you first.
Yeah, look, I have to say that obviously getting the right workforce balance and diversity in is actually a challenge that we're facing. Certainly, as a start, just getting more women drivers onto trains. It's they're very, very, very poorly represented in amongst our driving ranks at the moment. I think when you sort of gravitate back towards head office, I think gender diversity looks better, and it's always easier in certainly capital cities. But getting it down the front, right down the front line, is one of the challenges we face. We'd actually. When we target it right, I think there's certainly people who still want to join the industry and in the right mix. So we just recently recruited a bunch of graduates. Just graduated a bunch of drivers, I should say, in the Hunter Valley, and we recruited about a dozen or so people. It was very easy to get a good balance of people in that. So I think it's about us having the right policies and the right targeted recruitment in place. I think it's crucial to get a new generation of operational engineers, basically mechanical, electrical, instrument engineers into the business, basically then to actually grow and take over when the current generation move on. And I just sort of don't see enough of that traditional thinking where many other industries have very formalised graduate programs, etc., to bring people through. So I think that needs to happen. And then and the other part is, when we're working in regional areas, then we should have representative employment there. So from all basically races and creeds, etc. So we've got to get that right. So I think there's more to do. I think it's not a shortage of. I don't think it's a shortage of skills or there's a shortage of people. It's just a shortage of organisation, and investment certainly always helps that.
Mark, anything you want a final word from you?
Oh, look, I agree with Dean's experience. I mean, that's kind of what we see too. I think specifically in skills, we're certainly facing a shortage of electrical and signalling engineers. That if specifically, that's something we're trying to address at the moment. But with so much rail infrastructure currently being built, there is certainly a tightness in resources in construction, it's probably too late to deal with that, given the amount of infrastructure that's underway now. That's a much more of a medium to long-term solution. So we've got to put things in place to try and deal with the medium and long-term, and then quite separately just deal with the short-term issue that we have now.
Well, thanks for those insights. I'm going to go to the poll question and give you both a bit of a sense of where the audience is at. The question that we asked the audience was, what would you consider the greatest benefits of an optimised rail system? 53% said the productivity and efficiency gains, and 26% said boosting regional economies by enhancing supply chains. So that broadly accounts for roughly 80% of the responses. Sustainability and safety enhancements, 18%, and then creating more jobs from existing and new rail projects, 3%. So really all about productivity and efficiency and regional economies. Can I thank both of you, Mark Campbell, the CEO of the Australian Rail Track Corporation, and Dean Dalla, the CEO of Pacific National. Thank you both for your time and actually for your agility today in working around the Deputy Prime Minister. I know we all appreciate how busy he is, but I also really appreciate the insights that each of you have brought today and your flexibility in doing so. Can I also thank Mal McDowell for his recorded question, something new that we're trying, and it brings a slightly different take to the event. So thank you to Mal and to our event sponsors, CEDA and the Australian Rail Track Corporation. I say this all the time, but it is true. We can't do this without the support of our sponsors. And each of our sponsors always not only helps us bring these events, but they bring so much more to everything that CEDA is doing. So very sincere thanks to our sponsors. For our viewers, can I say thank you so much for all of the questions. There are loads of questions coming in. You're obviously very engaged in this issue. We'll keep Pigeonhole open for a little bit longer. Please feel free to put some questions in and then look out for the post-event email where we'll try to address as many of those questions as we possibly can. That is about it for me. To the audience, let me say this is my final live stream for the year. It has been a big year for all of us. And on behalf of the CEDA board and the whole team here at CEDA, I'd like to thank our members for all of their support this year. The support for live streams, which is something new for us, has been nothing short of tremendous. And it's been a real shot in the arm for us to be able to continue to engage with you through the live streams, to get the feedback from you and your encouragement in what we are trying to do and continuing to bring content and ideas in support of Australia's social and economic development. So thank you so much for your support throughout this whole year. I hope that the holiday season brings all of you an opportunity to relax, reconnect with family and loved ones. Please do so safely, and I look forward to seeing you all next year. It won't surprise you that we've got big plans for next year, so please look out for that. In the meantime, stay safe, and can I just finally thank my team who've demonstrated incredible resilience throughout the year and support for each other and for our members. So with that, thank you so very much, and I look forward to catching up with you in the new year.